Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Is everybody ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for joining us today. Today's Zoom talk is part of Deep Roots and New Growth in Wabaunsee County, a virtual exhibit and an online companion to the traveling Smithsonian exhibit, Crossroad Change in Rural America. Currently on exhibit at the Volan store near Alma, Kansas, in the heart of the Flint Hills Tallgrass Prairie. Deep Roots and New Growth in Wabaunsee County explores the rural culture of ranching and the small town life we treasure in Wabaunsee County. The exhibit has been designed by committees in the local community with help from the Wabaunsee County Historical Society, who have worked steadily since 2020, discussing what makes our community unique and why we value our traditions and how we look ahead to the future. It's our own story of rural America. Today, I have Dan Wagner, John Hund, Bud Hund, and Doug Holladay here with me on the porch in Paxico. They're going to talk for around 40 minutes, and then we will have time for questions at the end. If you think of a question, type it into the chat and I will read it so everyone can hear. I'm hoping that we won't be interrupted by a train, but that's a risk we are willing to take for the beautiful view on the Paxico porch. I thought it might be fun for all you participants to be able to turn on your cameras if you choose. That way you have the option to see each other and feel more like a community during the presentation. But if you just want to see us, be sure to click on the speaker view, and that's in the top right-hand corner of the Zoom screen, or you can swipe right on your phone and don't feel like you have to use the video. It's just kind of fun. And with that, I would like to introduce Paxico on the porch.
Hi there. But you're wondering what these four rail birds are doing up in the air over the main street of Paxico. Actually, so am I. But I'm here to introduce my old friend and partner in different community endeavors, including the Historical Society, the Mount Mitchell Society. Dan is to say that he's a history geek would be a wild understatement. He's a retired educator, retired administrator, and he is our go-to guy in the Historical Society. He conducts historical tours. He knows, he's got a Rolodex of a brain for history, both local, regional, nationwide, globally. And I'm going to introduce Dan. How did I do? Did I do all right?
I don't believe half of that.
Well, I didn't intend it to be. Totally.
But you know, the first thing I wanted to talk first because I wanted to give a historical perspective of Paxico a little bit for the viewers, and Paxico's history is quite interesting. And really, when you talk about Paxico, you have to talk about two of our ghost towns that we have here in Wabaunsee County. And to the north, we have a ghost town called Newberry. And just to the east, we have Old Paxico, which were both actually formed a little bit earlier. And the history there is this land was part of the Potawatomi Indian Reserve until 1869. And at that time, it was opened up for white settlement. Now, just to the north of us, we had a formation of the community of Newberry. And what happened was we had Jesuit priests from the settlement of St. Mary's brought some people over to this area, and that was actually the start of Newberry. Just to the east, about the same time, we had the start of a town called Old Paxico, which was right on the edge of the Potawatomi Indian Reserve. Those two towns had a little bit of development, and it wasn't until 1885 that some things started to happen, and that was with the coming of the railroad. In 1885, the Rock Island was finally making its way out to this area, and what happened was we had a big argument. Naturally, everybody wanted the depot. Where the depot was situated was everything to a town. If you had a depot, your town's going to make it. If you didn't have a depot, it was really questionable. And so what happened was that Newberry and Old Paxico started arguing and fighting and competing over who was going to get the depot. Over a period of time, the railroad kind of got put out with both of them and said to heck with both of them. And so they put the depot a mile south of Newberry and a mile west of Old Paxico. So neither one of them got the depot. And really in 1886, that was the start of a new community here where the depot was the center really. And that was Paxico in 1886. So we have a little kiosk right here on the corner that kind of explains the history. And really the history of Paxico is involve Old Paxico with its mill and other things. And I don't want to go into too much detail about that, but they were instrumental in forming what's now Paxico. Matter of fact, the buildings that existed in both communities were moved. Many of the buildings were moved down here and helped start what became Paxico. The other historical thing about Paxico was one of the interesting things is it developed, as many small towns did at that time along the railroad. But one of the distinctive things about Paxico was the exodusters who came in the late 1870s and 1880s. And the exodusters were freed blacks that were living in our area. They came from Tennessee, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Texas primarily, especially the Tennessee area, it seems like. And what happened is that in 1886, our country was going through the Reconstruction era after the Civil War, and things were a mess in the South, to say the least. But in 1886, we had a presidential election that was very controversial, and we came up with this compromise of 1887 that said, in essence, that the presidential election, which was very controversial, was going to be settled, and Rutherford B. Hayes would be president, but they had to compromise and say, tell the Democrats that they were going to remove the troops that were in the South. And mainly, they were there to enforce Reconstruction and enforce some of the laws and protect the freedmen. But what happened was the compromise of 1877, we removed the troops. Now, when the troops were removed, the blacks lost their protection, and thousands, tens of thousands of them immediately left their homes, left everything, and a lot of them came, a majority of them came to Kansas territory because of our reputation of John Brown and protection of the blacks and everything like that. And, things weren't perfect here in Kansas, but they were a lot better than many of the areas that they were coming from. So we had an influx of blacks that came to Paxico. And at the turn of the century, in 1903, 1904, 1905, about a third of Paxico was populated by freed blacks. And they played a very important role in our community. And they did in Wabaunsee County as a whole. But it seemed, there was a certain acceptance that they found here in Paxico that maybe didn't quite exist in many of the other areas. And certainly in many other counties, that was not the case of any acceptance. So, but anyway, as far as economically, as far as the history of Paxico too, as many small towns, it's had its ups and downs. In the 1970s, it kind of went through the downswing a little bit, but it found its niche, it seems like, with a kind of revival, and I'll introduce Bud here in just a second, but the antique stores and some of the other specialty stores that came about in Paxico kind of resurrected the town in many ways. And so with that, I don't want to talk too much. I could go on and on about history of Paxico, but it's a kind of the location of Paxico. The only thing economically I can speak about is that I think it has a great location. We are halfway between Topeka and Manhattan. And we are a small town, 230 residents. And small town life has an appeal to many, many people. And there's many appealing things about small town life. But you also, so you have that, but you also have access to all the things that bigger towns have, movie theaters, shopping, and so forth. And so to me, Paxico, because of its location, we're just a mile off Interstate 70. We are very much, I think, have the best of both worlds as far as that's concerned. And I will not continue to go on. I want to let some other people talk here, but I think I'll kind of throw it over to Bud here and kind of let him talk for a little bit. So.
I'll tell you what, Bud's instrumental in this town, so let me introduce him a little bit so you get an idea of who he is. His name is Steve Hund Jr. And if you don't call him Bud, then you're not from around here. Now, old Bud here, he's got quite a footprint, and he's touched a lot of lives, including my own. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here right now, quite frankly. I came to this town and it sucked me in. You know, I get to escape reality while I'm here, go back in time. And no small efforts from what Bud has done. When he was younger, he worked for the railroad, making pretty good money. But in the evenings and weekends, he'd buy antiques and restore them, primarily wood stoves and lamps. Pretty soon he had enough money and he bought a building down here in downtown Paxico, which was falling down, dilapidated. The buildings needed to be knocked down. He bought that building, fixed it up. Pretty soon he was making enough money, so he quit working and became full-time at the antique store, and then bought the building next door. And then the one next door to that. Pretty soon he had half this block. So he made it an antique mall where you can walk through the whole thing. And this today it stands as Mill Creek Antiques. It's probably one of the biggest and unique high-end stores in the Midwest. So what Bud has done, he was born here, raised here, married here, has his kids. And with all that happening in the meantime, in all that time, he was also buying stone buildings around Wabunsee County, restoring them. And he's done a lot here. He loves this place, and I'm honored to call him a friend. So I'm happy to introduce Bud Hunt.
Well, I'm overwhelmed, Doug. And if you believe everything he said, why, he's probably got some land he'd like to sell you down in swampland down in Florida too. That's where he spends most of his time in the winter. But well, a little bit about, people always ask me, I would just review the frequent questions that I have to answer every day by running this antique store. And what is this building? It was a general store. It was a large operation at one time run by 5 brothers for over 50 years. It's 1886. I believe the building was actually built as a speculation venture by 2 gentlemen from St. Mary's, Kansas. So once that you heard Dan, excuse me, talk about the depot. The depot was key. That was the commerce center. Anything you bought or needed to sell and ship off, it went through the depot. And once the depot was established, people saw the potential to build buildings here. And what they generally did was build the building, lease it to someone who cared to operate it. And this is what the Bolton brothers did. And they leased the building for 15 years, operated a general store here, then sold it to the Glusbaugh brothers. And the other buildings in town, the same thing. They were speculation built because they knew once that the depot was established that the town would blossom. And it must have happened overnight. But then, you know, time took its toll and people couldn't make their living on the farm. They had to go into the city to get jobs. So there was a decline in the business district. And that was still going on in the 60s, early 70s. And we were declared one of the top ghost towns in Kansas, top 5 ghost towns in Kansas. Actually, a lot of vacant buildings here. So I started becoming interested in old buildings and antiques when I purchased a farmhouse in 1972. It had been abandoned for 25 years. It had no plumbing, no heating. So I put a wood stove in there and I eventually got some plumbing. But it motivated me to think about buying and selling because I worked for the Rock Island Railroad. And the Rock Island Railroad had its struggle. So 1973, bought a little bit of this building. I had $300 to start the business. I went and bought some antiques, went to Arkansas, bought antiques, bought them here locally, and started my business. Now, so we get into the late 70s. Now we still look down the street. You can't see it, but most all these buildings were abandoned by that time. And there was a gas station here, and one across the street, and a couple of taverns. But other than that, there wasn't much here in terms of operating businesses. So I had a friend that said, well, you know what? What you ought to think about is inviting people to come here and open businesses, because and buy these old dilapidated buildings for $1,500. You could buy a building here in the 70s. And so I thought, yeah, okay, yeah, why not? So I convinced one friend to come here and buy an old gas station. Well, he helped me to encourage other people to come. And we'd walk over there to vacant buildings and say, you know, you can buy this building, you get all the contents, there's a bar, there's a Coke machine, and there's some other stuff in there. You can have it all for $1,500. Now, if you only pay $1,500 for your building, you don't really have to sell much through the course of the year because your overhead is low. And people started to buy into that. And they said, well, there's not much going on here, but maybe it will at some point. So that was the beginning of it. So we're sitting here in an 1886 building that's on the National Register. And these buildings that are adjacent to it are also on the register. They're in a historic district. And this is what the Historic Trust for Preservation established that. And they recognize that people are fascinated with the architecture, old architecture. And I tell people the best example I can see of that is New Orleans. There is no major attraction in that city other than the French Quarter, the Garden District. Those buildings are fascinating to people, and it draws enough people to be qualified as one of the 10 tourist destinations in the world. They claim that. They have millions of people go there every year. They're just walking around looking at buildings. The same thing here, you know. And so, and other people would say to me, "Well, gee, your town, you know, you got 12 antique stores, everything's vibrant. You got a couple of, had 3 restaurants going there for a while." And people say, "Well, how can we get our town to be like your town? Our town's dying too." Look at a specialty product. It doesn't have to be antiques. It could be cheese. Wine, it could be stone, it could be anything like that. And that's what you can build your district, your commercial district around that product. And if it's a specialty product, they won't mind driving a distance to go look at it or maybe purchase it. And so that was my advice. So that's basically what I've done for the last 48 years. I'm in my 48th year here in this building. And I recognize that it's not just enough to have a nice looking old building. You have to bring the people to your town that have never been here before. And that's when we embarked on the festivals. We started the festivals and we based them on the German theme because we're all German immigrants. The whole town, there isn't an Irishman in this whole town. And so we started doing festivals, and we did historical festivals. We did polka festivals. We did everything you could think of in terms of festivals over the years. And eventually we fell into one that, and Dan makes this good point, a woman who grew up here, an African-American woman, walked in the door one day and said, "This is my hometown." I said, "It is? Who are you?" I thought I knew everybody. Well, she grew up here, left when she was pretty young, but had a career in the music business. She owned clubs. She put on festivals in Kansas City. She worked the door at a lot of the really important blues clubs in Kansas City, and was always promoting the music. And she said, "Well, do you have any festivals here?" I said, "Yeah, we have a polka fest, but hardly anybody knows how to dance the polka anymore because they were all passed away." She said, "Well, maybe I can help you. I put on a festival in Kansas City." And he went, "Yeah, that's an idea." So we start 18 years ago. And we had 5 or 6 lawn chairs over here across the street, and we had some bales of hay on a trailer for a stage. We thought, okay, let's just see how this works. And we had a little bit of crowd. We probably had 40 or 50 people show up. The last festival we had about 5,000 people. So the music, why the music? Everything we did at festivals was based upon music. Because music motivates people. Just think of all the different ways it motivates people. And why do people go to festivals? So to hear the music. You know, it's just, that is a constant thing. And somebody said this quote once, you know, talking about war, said, you take the guns and we'll take the music and we'll see who wins the war. And think about that. Think about how important music is in motivating people in a time of war. So anyway, that's what we have focused on totally. We realize the value of it because it'll bring people to your town that have never been here. And that's a value to everybody that lives in the town. The business people, the people that provide food, the people that provide music, it's all right there.
I might interject
Go
just
ahead.
for a second. You know, we talked about the Black culture that was here in Paxico. It was very, very important. Marvine was the mother of my best friend in high school, Junior Atkins, who was one of the few Blacks left. What happened, the Blacks, like I say, about the turn of the century, about a third of Paxico was Black. And part of that was because of the acceptance of Blacks. And what happened was basically, as Bud was kind of alluding to a little bit, economically, there was only certain opportunities. A lot of the Blacks, when they first came, were farmers. And then they got involved in the railroad. Most of them worked for the railroad. And so then came the Great Depression. And that's really when we lost most of our Black population, was during the Depression years, when they almost felt the necessity to move to Topeka and Kansas City and those areas for job opportunities. And so that was really what happened. We have very few Blacks that live in Paxico today. And so I just want to interject that. So,
of course, we had the African American culture. They were a big part. And involved a lot in agriculture. They worked on the farms. They owned farms, but that was not the only aspect of music. You had all these German immigrants who were very musical. And this is, I don't know if you can show this. This is a Paxico band. And that's probably about the turn of the century, maybe about 1900 or so. And so there was always a lot of music involved in the community. And that was their social activity, to enjoy each other's music, you know, because, you know, otherwise they would have to go to a larger town. So, and, you know, through the churches, and there was a German club here, and that was all about the music and possibly some adult beverages. But anyway, that's all I have to say. But I want to introduce somebody here today that can follow up. You know, I talked a little bit about the music, but here's a guy. Now I had to write all this down because there's a lot to tell. And this is Doug Holladay, and I asked him what he wanted me to say about what he'd done. And so he said, well, he's semi-retired and he's been an auctioneer. He's been in television. He had his own television program in Santa Barbara, California, called The Best of Santa Barbara. He had a barber shop. He's been a barber. He has been a disc jockey. And he also grew up in a family that had a newspaper in the next town over. And I don't know if he didn't really care for the newspaper business, but he somehow embarked upon a project of demolishing 85 printing plants around the United States. And Sal, he can tell you a little bit more about that. But so here's Doug, and he is the new guy on the block, but not really new. We've known each other for a long time. but we share a lot of the vision. You know, they mentioned that there's supposed to be visionaries here. We want to think that we're visionaries, that we have a plan for Paxico for the future. And Doug, you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So my involvement in this town is I'm going to spend the summers up here. And I love building, and I used to flip houses and build houses on the side. But 25 years ago, I bought a house over on Mill Creek right behind us, and fixed that up, sold it 2 years later. I moved to Florida. Here it is 25 years later. So I come back. My mom still lives locally, so I see her quite a bit. And I've always known Bud, but he was always doing that old ploy again. You know, maybe you should buy this building over here. You know, maybe you should buy this one. And all of a sudden, it just made sense. And so I bought 3 of them. And I spent all last year restoring them. And 2 of them are completely restored, electrical, plumbing, new paint, poured a new basement, the whole thing. It's very nice. And then we bought Lulu's, and that's the historic tavern and brothel. And we have big plans for that place. But we've already renovated the upstairs, and we've recruited Travis Mott, who is currently one of the band music teachers in Topeka, Kansas. And he's going to kind of be in charge of our music here. And he now lives up there with his beautiful partner, Bella. And the first 2 buildings that we renovated, we are starting today, in fact, moving artwork in. And it will be a working studio and an art gallery. And that's happening right now. And we have recruited a young lady from Pennsylvania, and she is a master artist, 23 years old. She just turned 24, I'm sorry. But she's going to actually be working on site and in the studio. But my vision for this town, and I haven't developed it, just kind of happens as we go, but I'd like to see music. So we kind of like to do a music town and be a Friday, Saturday night venue with food, great music in multiple venues. And so one of the projects I'm going to be starting this summer is going to be an outdoor stage for a venue right downtown. And the thing we're lacking here is places to stay, lodging. So I'm building 2 bunkhouses behind one of the buildings that we have here, and with plans on expanding, but that's probably good enough for the summer. But in about a month, we're going to be having probably our first live entertainment. And then we're going to do something every Friday or Saturday after that, and then start working on food. So this is our trial run this summer. Next year should be a lot better. And once we get everything set up correctly, then we're going to do one of Bud's old tricks and bring friends in to help build the town up. And, you know, but we're old now. We've been around. A lot of our friends have been very successful, and we're going to convince them to help us out with our vision. So I think that's probably good enough for me. Dan, you ought to tell everybody about this fellow right here.
Okay. So I'd like to introduce John Hund. Steve and John are brothers, and but John's been I've known John all my life, and I knew his family, and you know, when you talk even about Steve or John, you have to talk about their family, because their family has been so involved in not only Paxico, but our museum. He was really one of the founding fathers. His dad was of our museum up here now, the Wabaunsee County Historical Society. And you know, their family's just been so involved in so many things. John is involved. We have an organization with Mountain Mitchell, and John takes the time to do things, finds the time to do so many things and so much volunteerism that it's really quite incredible. And he's very talented, and he's very knowledgeable of history, and he's a big reader, and just a very, very talented man. So I'll let you take it from there, John.
Well, yeah, I'll start where you started. My brother and I grew up in Mill Creek Valley, about 2 miles from here. on a place that's been in our family for 150 years this year, into the 7th generation. And so through the course of history, when our great-great-grandfather moved here in 1872, but he bought property in 71, we have seen, we have heard the stories, we have read the stories of all of the generations that came before us. Our parents taught us the value, not the value, the obligation of community service. Our parents were heavily involved, and they were busy people too. When Bud took the road less traveled by becoming an entrepreneur here in Paxico. I went off to school, had a career in counseling at the Old Vinegar Foundation for a long time, but I always kept an interest in the home place, the farming, the ranching, cattle, the horses. And then in the mid 80s, I quit my job in Topeka and came back here to be a full-time rancher, farmer. I often say it's kind of like the mafia. Just when you think you're out, they suck you back in again. So, and that's the way it is. And when you become this involved in the Flint Hills. The history of Paxico is so colorful. And we grew up with all this information, including some of our direct ancestors. We had an ancestor. Things were a little tough, after our grandfather owned the bank here. He was a veterinarian, started the first telephone company, very progressive people. They were Percheron breeders, which was a French war horse that was used for farming before tractors became prevalent here. So that was John Hund, who I was named after. But there's another ancestor. When hard times came, and Prohibition arrived, and Paxico was provided a needed service, let's say. One ancestor, there are still some old people, old guys that remember him very well. And the main thing that they praised him for was that he created the first drive-up window. His house still exists here in town. And so his bedroom
Let me
window,
interject a little bit. There's a picture of him if you might want to flash that on the screen.
his bedroom window was right next to kind of an alleyway. And any time of the day or night, especially at night. Now, he didn't make his own whiskey, but he was a bootlegger and only handled good product out of Kansas City. And in those days, there was no such thing as a fifth or a quart. Everything was sold in pint and half pint bottles to conceal more easily. And so Paxico never really slowed down that much. In fact, Bud can maybe corroborate this. Some overzealous, there's always a little overzealousness, in Prohibition, because most of these towns, they realized that it was a needed source of revenue. So he had to do a little time, maybe a week or so, or a couple of weeks. And they would let him out on Saturday morning. He'd get in his car, drive home, get his laundry done, go to Sunday Mass, and then go check in again on Sunday evening. I think it was a Mayberry kind of a connection. So that's just part of our direct history. Now, the community here, since this is basically a German Catholic community, has always revolved around the church, which is pretty large. We still have 130 or 135 families. And I'm involved on that council too. But we've seen that evolve over the years in a good way. When we were all kids, it was an agrarian society here. Now, Dan's dad had a job in Topeka, and there were quite a few people that commuted every day, but most people were farmers and ranchers. That's all changed now. There's probably, a third as many as there used to be. Yes, when we were growing up. So that's changed the profile of the community quite a bit. But Dan started by saying we're perfectly positioned. You could say that we're a bedroom community to Manhattan and Topeka. So most of these young families that are moving in now, even in the town of Paxico, they're not necessarily having to look for a place out in the country, a few acres indoors. And virtually all of them commute either to Manhattan or to Pekin, 25 minutes away. So that's changed tremendously. There's no excuse me, there's no reason to believe that will. There's no reason to believe that we're going to have a boom in population, but that arc will probably continue as people move away. The infrastructure here move away from cities and live in this slow-moving place that lets you catch your breath. Now my brother was, I often say that if it weren't for, I call him the P.T. Barnum of Paxico. He comes up with these crazy ideas and say, geez, and they work. And if he didn't have that vision, I'm pretty sure there'd be tumbleweeds blowing down streets today. So he was a catalyst. And then with the Blues Fest, he's telling me that can't be done. Watch this, and then it works. So
I'd like to interject. You touched a little bit about our great uncle being in business. There was another enterprise down the street that was very successful. And it was Teeny Mungerson's Saloon. Doug is the current owner.
Yeah.
But you got to understand the dire straits that people were in during the Great Depression. There was crop failure. There were no jobs. So people did have to revert to selling alcohol. And it was said that it was available at every place in town, including the post office. But if you serve food, you got a variance. So if you had some food, I mean, that some of that lost still just a little bit today. So it allowed you to be open. Maybe you didn't openly serve liquor, but maybe you did, depending on who and how your law enforcement reacted to what was going on. But down the street, Tina Mungerson was a single woman, operated a saloon. And I don't know what was going on upstairs, but there were lots of rooms upstairs. But and liquor was sold in half pints. And it was said that the way she made most of her money was to buy the half pints, put her own label on, drill a hole in the bottom, drain out half of it, and use the well in her backyard to fill it up, and dilute the whiskey. And then she would put some way to cork the bottom of it where she drilled a hole in. But she had her own label. And I give you a look at this label. Let me read this to you. Here, go ahead and pass that one around. These are some of the labels that were found in her building by some of the people who are doing restoration down there. So what she was selling was hop tea. So it was not a liquor per se, it was a medicine, but she was allowed to sell. So the hop tea said, beware of imitations. It has restorative and promptly relieves nervousness, conquers dyspepsia. It is an excellent recuperant of weak physical energy. And these are some of the labels that she put on this half ice that she sold.
See, that was another way that they got around the liquor laws. That time prohibition was medicinal. Methods. The Sealy Mansion out of Abilene is a great example. He was that's how he made his fortune.
Well, Paxico actually was the first liquor store in Kansas, and the building still exists down there. And I was going to one more interjection. One of the buildings I bought used to be a pharmacy, and the next door was the doctor. But the pharmacist for years and years sold drugs out of that place to anybody without a prescription. Turns out he wasn't licensed, and just a drug dealer.
But the other thing Bud was talking about, Lulu's. I always call it Lulu's. That saloon down there, and but it was actually, I read yesterday and just kind of looking over some stuff and getting ready for this, but it was a licensed brothel for 4 years.
It was?
Yeah. I didn't know that until yesterday.
Wow. Really?
Because I'd never seen it in any documentation, but everybody talked about it. But I found that yesterday. I was going through some stuff.
So we've heard a lot of stories about her. You know, she wore fur coats, expensive jewelry. She made cash loans to the farmers. The banks could collapse. They couldn't borrow money. So there were individuals who were wealthy enough would make loans. Well, she loaned out to farmers, farmland over here adjacent to the river, a lot of it. And they couldn't pay it back. She ended up with all that farmland, all those farms on the river. And but she continued to operate this place down there. And her daughter, Lulu, was there. And I knew Lulu and her husband, Bill. And I used to walk by as a kid. I walked by that place down there. And on the window, it said sandwiches. And I never saw anybody eating a sandwich in there. We're eating any sandwiches. So anyway, that was at Mungerson Saloon, and I firmly believe that it's the same year as this building, because a lot of the hardware is the same, the windows are the same, you know, the construction is the same. 1886.
And then, you know, John, I have to follow what he talked about with the liquor, you know, the bootlegging out there with Joe Hund out the side of his window. I live right across the street from that house now, but my mom, who's passed, but she lived in the house. She grew up in the house just to the east of them, and her bedroom was right up here, second floor, and it faced west. Well, she always knew, and they used to call it a drive-in. You know, that was Paxico's or Kansas's first drive-in liquor store. But she'd always knew when somebody was coming in for liquor because their lights would always shine right up in her bedroom. And she said sometimes on Saturday nights there was a pretty steady stream of, you know, lights, and so she always knew that. But you know, alcohol. And I always tell people when we do the historical thing in the buildings, and we did that a couple of years ago. We had a big tour through here. Almost every building in town been a liquor store or a tavern at one time or the other. You know, that's one thing that's common here. It was it played a cultural relevance here in town, no doubt about it.
That explains too where my brother got his entrepreneurial spirit. Great Uncle Joe, who saw a need and filled it. But I want to mention just one more thing about Black history and my experience growing up here. Paxico was an extremely accepting town. There was a shortcut to being in trouble was to speak disparagingly about any Black people. They lived with us, they worked with us. In the 1920 census, there was a man named Arthur Scott, who was listed as a household member of my grandfather's house. He was an employee, but he lived with him. He was illiterate, but he had a photographic memory. And he was the only Black Catholic. He was well loved. He was very gifted. He could play the violin.
Mojo.
Yeah. His cousin was the lead attorney in the Brown versus Board of Education.
Yep.
Scott was the lead attorney in that case that ended segregation in public schools. So that's I always thought that was an interesting sidebar. And I never encountered any prejudice at all, any prejudicial thinking or any kind of spoken prejudice until I got to college. Now there's a paradox. You know, these kids from Wichita and Kansas City would start talking about Black people in a disparaging way. And at 17 years old, I was kind of shocked by that.
And I was the same way. I never experienced that because we had my best friend was a Black guy, and until I went in the Army, then you're exposed to it extremely then. But you know, but anyway, I didn't even know he was talking about Arthur Scott, the guy, you know, that did all this work, and I didn't even know what his real name was. We called him Mojo, you know, and I don't think anybody knew his real name hardly at that time, you know, but, and then I finally looked it up and saw, you know, Arthur Scott, but,
Yeah, it seems a little derogatory, but it wasn't meant that way.
No. Everybody had, you know, no, it wasn't, no, not at all, you know, so. I just remember him sitting on the back of the church with his rosary.
Three-piece suit, hand-painted Hawaiian tie, gold chain.
Yeah. And he was
a greeter. He knew everybody. There people could come out from Kansas City that hadn't appeared in Newberry for 15 years. He knew every one of them. who their siblings were, who their parents were, half generations back. So, but
Yeah,
he was illiterate.
Yeah, we had 2 black churches here in town at one time.
Cemetery.
Yeah, and
Black cemetery.
really we call it the Black Cemetery. It's Newberry Cemetery. So yeah, they played part in our culture here in town. History.
So a Civil War soldier, the Black Civil War soldier, very good.
Yeah, Medley is his name.
And Buffalo soldiers, more than one
Buffalo soldier.
cavalry.
And then we have some questions. Are you guys ready
Okay,
for questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so question, how did Paxico get its name?
What bud do that one?
A Native American Potawatomi Indian lived near the old mill site. His name, it is spelled, I've seen it spelled many different ways, but Pasqua, somehow it came up to be Pasqua. And from that, they derived Paxico. And I actually know of a Potawatomi Indian whose first name is Paxico, who lives as part of the citizen band Potawatomi tribe in Oklahoma. There's a young man whose name is Paxico. So, but this Indian, they called him a chief. I'm not sure he was a chief. Lived down near the mill. The Indians actually worked for the millers down there. They drove the wagons of grain into the mill from the farms. So they were in camp down there near the mill. But I've seen his name, like I say, written several different ways. But we believe that he was named, and he was considered to be a medicine man more than an Indian chief. And we believe that he was named. Is that right? Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
Dan?
Okay, and then question number 2. So there's a few different questions about like German descent towns versus Irish descent towns, and like how did people decide where to live, and kind of the history of like, you know, different people settling in different places and collecting
If you look
together.
At most towns in Kansas, though, most towns in Kansas, small towns, have a separate ethnic background that, because you're drawn to people like you that speak the same language, have the same religion, and that's what happens. Is they, you know, you look at even Chicago, Illinois, you know, and look at Chicago, the town itself is very pocketed with different nationalities and ethnic groups, but. In our situation, we were influenced dramatically by St. Mary's, and really the first families that came here were really German Catholic, and so that was the influence in the history of our town. So,
As a sidebar, now Bud and my first ancestors immigrated here in 1835, and they all came from the Black Forest, the Baden region. This reminded them, the ones that were farmers and stock keepers, when they looked at these fertile valleys along Milk Creek, that reminded them of their homeland. And that's what attracted them here. And plus the Flint Hills. They immediately realized the rich grazing potential of the Flint Hills.
and I have to interject too, as far as religion. You know, Paxico is German Catholic. Alma, one of our nearby towns, and they always say proximity breeds contempt, but you know, rivalry, we call it rivalry, but you know, Alma is also German, Lutheran. And so there's always been, and these guys, especially Steve and John here, you can understand the rivalry between Alma and Paxico has been intense. And I, you know, all through my life, and so that's kind of interesting, but religion did play a role in that. I mean, it kind of amplified it, let's put it that way. So.
And then we have a question for Doug about the type of music and kind of the general plan of this summer, how people can enjoy music.
Oh, it's going to be rap mostly.
Oh.
Maybe a little reggae, but hardcore rap. And then, no, you know, it's like the first band we have coming up from Texas. And it's not 100% settled, but it'll be at the end of the month. And they're kind of a Texas blues, you know. And Mike Babb, he's the lead singer over from Maple Hill there. But there definitely will be probably strong folk and country influence. But there's one group that I haven't heard yet. It's 3 women, and they harmonize together. It's supposed to be wonderful. And I'm not quite sure what they play, but anybody with great talent, really. You know, Kelly Hunt's been here many times. I'd love to have her back. And I don't know. It's just whatever the people want. The venue we're going to be constructing this year is also going to be rented out. So people will rent the venue, bring their own people, or tell us what we want. We'll find them. And that's what we're shooting for.
That's good. And then, John, we have a question about Paxico sausage. What is it?
What is it? This is a product that was developed by my great-great-grandfather and his family. And we have it's been kind of part of our culture, because for about 50 years, the church has a sausage dinner as a fundraiser. And a number of years ago, my wife and I redeveloped the recipe, made it leaner, less salt, made it healthier, and it still tastes great. Now, we've run into a big problem due to COVID, because our manufacturer is just stuck in the mud with other things. So I'm in the process of looking for another maker in Kansas City right now, so hopefully. But it's basically the same thing, the same ingredients that our ancestors had, all natural, nothing like sulfites or things that sound like fertilizer in it. So it's been a big hit here and around the region.
Well, you know, he doesn't widely distribute it, and people may want to know that. I mean, you have to come here, Paxico, to buy it, or you have to go to Alma or Bellevue, or where can you might take
the wineries,
the
Grandma
wineries.
Horner's, Alma Cheese, Bellevue.
So he mentioned, you know, our great-great-grandfather brought that sausage with him in 1872, and we've attempted to keep it refrigerated for most of the time, and but we sell quite a bit of it. And if you come to our store on Saturday, you might see a wood-burning cook stove with a pan full of sausage being cooked on the wood stove, and we sample it out then. I did want to bring up one other thing. Doug, you didn't mention about me being
hometown hero.
Hometown hero. And you were supposed to write a letter about why you thought, tell the people why you thought I was a hometown hero.
Well, I don't know about that, but I tell you one thing, Bud, actually, to brag on him a little bit, is he really is probably the foremost expert of wood burning stoves in the United States. And he literally has clients around the globe. And he's been doing it for so long, but when people need to know the history or what type of stove from San Francisco to New York, they call him and then fly him out there. And currently right now, he's supplying the movie props for a Scorsese film down in Oklahoma with a $200 million budget. So this guy's got his fingers in a lot of things, and we're glad to have him.
Starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Have you heard him?
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah. Okay.
Robert De Niro.
Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
Oh. Is there any?
Molly, you get home. You get you get home.
We got a stray dog. So someone was wondering if if the Potawatomi tribes are still in the area, and if there's a connection with the town, and if there is a cultural history, and if that might be part of the Paxico revival.
Well, Indian history is part of our culture. I mean, not only because this was Potawatomi land at one time. What happened is the Potawatomi Indians split. They basically have their citizen band, and then they have their prairie band. And they actually have a big headquarters thing for their citizen band over here by Rossville. And of course, the reservation is still up. The prairie band has a reservation up by Delia. It's about 40 square miles, I believe. But the citizen band, most of them are in Oklahoma at this time. But yeah, they played a tremendous role here. Those were the Indians that were here when we started settling, and so there's lots of things there. Now, they weren't the first. The Kansas Indians, which our state's named after, were really along the Kansas River and pretty close to the Syria too. But the Potawatomi, they were moved. Indians are. It's such an interesting history because they've been moved here, they moved there, and they moved to Kansas for a while, then they moved to Oklahoma. And so it's kind of convoluted to try and follow. But they've basically been split. A lot of people in history have never heard of the Trail of Death. You've heard of the Trail of Tears. But the Trail of Death involved the Potawatomi Indians, and those were the Indians that eventually were transported down into down here in our area. So.
There's a lot of stories about the Native American people, and right over behind us, you can't see it as a giant cliff by a campground. And I was told that the Indians would drive the buffalo over the cliff, so that they could slaughter them, and they would pick up the remains of the buffalo at the bottom of the cliff and butcher them. And after they butchered them, they always use the Paxico brand barbecue sauce. You can read about it in this book.
And only buy right here.
Always.
Yeah, we've sold that for years.
And then, Dan, we have a shout out for your work on the city infrastructure, including the park and then some sort of water project. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's just, I retired. I was a school principal for a long time. 38 years, and so when I retired, my dream was always to come back here. I bought the family house and everything, and I always, and people, you're going back to Paxico, because they'd always think Manhattan or Topeka. That's what a lot of people retire to. I'm a hometown boy, and my brother's going to move back here too. He's going to retire probably next year, and so we were raised. We were, much like the Hund family. My mom's family was a Stork family, and I got to talk about that. I don't mean to get off the subject, but if you look down in Bud's antique thing, they have a map of Germany, and it has where the different families in part of Germany where they're from. That is the neatest map. And when I take people on tours, we go there every time and stop in and see Bud, and so. But the park and some of the infrastructure, Paxico. It's an antique mecca. It really is. But you have to be careful. Old, there's quaint and then there's trashy. You want to stay away from, you want things to be nice. You don't, and that there were some needs. And so, everybody now, they ask me what I do, and I just tell them I mow grass, and that's basically, but our park was a big, important part of Paxico. Because we have people from other towns that come here to our park because they just like the layout and they like the basketball court, because you can race and roll everything. And it's a draw in itself,
So your brother's moving back here too, Steve?
Yep.
Do you think Paxico can handle 2 Wagners with that much energy? Well, this town's going to be rebuilt in 10 days.
He could help me mow grass.
So Dan doesn't really like to talk about a lot of his accomplishments.
Tree whisperer.
Ask him how many trees he's planted in this town. And what are you up to now? Are you 100? Are you at 100?
200 at least.
200 trees he's planted.
78 just at the park.
78 at the park. If you look up and down the streets, you can see the trees that he's planted. And then, of course, the park was just a wheat patch, and part of it was adjacent to a junkyard. And people would say, "Well, what are you going to do with that wheat patch down there? You need playground equipment, and where are you going to get all that?" And he made it happen. He really did. He made it happen, and people were like, "Wow, look at that park!" And of course, it's continuing now. The fountain across the street, and
landscaping.
Landscaping is, you drive around the country and you drive into a little town. What is the first things that you notice, really? Maybe it doesn't jump out at you, but is it landscaped? Is somebody taking the time and the care to maintain or provide some sort of landscaping to the main streets that drive through that town? It says a lot about how people care about their community. So, yeah, it's fabulous.
And then I didn't tell you that I'd be doing this, but since there's like 1 minute left, do you want to end with like a thought that you'd like to leave with people, or a summary or a nugget or something? I should have told you ahead of time.
Well, we want people to come here.
Yeah.
We want them to come and enjoy the music, shop for the antiques, go down the street and have a beer in a tavern that serves a beer from the oldest brewery in the world.
Yeah. And it's based here in Paxico.
One of,
The distribution.
It's a German beer, of course.
one of the things we're trying to do through the Historical Society with Marcy is we're trying to do a little historic ventures out from Paxico. You know, there's Oregon Trail Park, there's Mount Mitchell, there's, you know, to show people, and we're very involved in that right now. So.
And of course, they can go to the Ball and Store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if anybody has talents that they'd like to share and become part of a community, this would be a good place to come check out. See if you can fit in here, because we're looking for you.
I see Doug as a different kind of catalyst. The guy could get you excited. He's a visionary. He's had experience, and he's a doer. And so far, so good.
Let's end it there then.
Hooray.
Well, the story's
Sounds
over.
Great.
Okay, I'll do a final view of the,
Well, the park.
we'll do a view of the porch so that people can kind of see what the area is that we've been talking about. But thank you so much, you guys.
No trains.
Yeah, we lucked out.
It was ordained.
No trains. There was a secret plan that there would have been a dance party if a train went by.
Out of town, they're from out of state. They walk down the street. They think they're.
Thank you guys for coming.